Welcome back to Up in the Blue Seats podcast, our New York Rangers podcast from the New York Post. We are back. You thought we were done, but coaching changes happen in this sport. And after 2 seasons, Gerard Gallant has been fired. Jake Brown here with Mollie Walker and our Hall of Famer, Larry Brooks. Let's get right to it, guys. Larry, news comes out on Saturday. I was at the Mets game, middle of another team losing here in New York as New York sports takes a tumble. Initial reactions to the firing, what'd you think?
Well, I thought once the Rangers went 48 hours um, without any official show of support for Gallant, it was pretty clear that there was going to be a change. I think both parties recognized that they'd probably gone as far as they could. There was, I think, some tension at the end, frustration at the end on both sides, and so I think again, when Gallant said on Wednesday's breakup day that he shouldn't have to be answering these questions, and the Rangers didn't provide an answer, then it was pretty clear something was up. So look, he's a good person. Obviously, he's a good coach. I think his track record his history hangs over him like a black cloud, because as soon as the second year starts, people are looking for flaws. Well, that's why he never lasts more than two, and it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think he got a little more defensive, a little more stubborn as last year went on. And again, I think it's because he has that history trailing him. Oh, he never gets through the third year. He never gets through the third year. So I think it just all caught up to him, caught up to them. Their performance in four out of the last five playoff games was just unacceptable, and obviously something had gone wrong.
I can't imagine that Gallant appreciated to be in the position that he was on breakup day. And I think that was pretty evident in his answers and the tone that he took with those types of questions, which can you blame him? And what he said was not incorrect. You know, if he can't stand by his track record, then there must be something wrong. So I was a little surprised also just because of what is available right now. But I guess that when you come to the conclusion that it's not working out, that no matter what, that there's a better that there should be a better option available if what you currently have in-house isn't working out, right?
Yeah, well, I've always thought, like, during the season, when you hear about, different teams and different experiences I've had, covering the Rangers and other teams, that once you get into this, well, we need to win tomorrow. We need to, you're just forestalling the inevitable, right? I mean, if you're not confident in the guy you have, if you're not confident and with this team, if you're not confident you can win a Stanley Cup, then you never want to settle for the least offensive alternative, right? I mean, you're right. You're looking for someone who you think can win a cup, and clearly the Rangers had reached the point where they didn't. I thought it was interesting because he was exactly as he was advertised.
Mm-hmm.
The people I talked to before, when he was a candidate, great coach, good guy, old school guy, players coach, but he's not great in-game adjustments. And and so what you were told was he needs strong assistants. And I thought his assistants were fine. I don't think either of us are here to kick this man or, these coaches when they're down. They're pros, and they brought whatever they could, and they got the Rangers to 110 and 107 points
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
2 years. But I just, I think that there was a recognition on both sides that it was not going to be a productive relationship going forward. And so, regardless of the pool, which I think we all see as pretty shallow at this point, not that they can't get a big time coach out of it, but it's not like last year
No.
when there were like seven big name coaches out there, including Barry Trotz.
Mm-hmm.
including Paul Maurice, who has Florida one game away from the conference finals, and so it's going to be a very interesting search. It's going to be a very challenging one, I think, and it's a critical one because for a long time the Rangers were a very stable organization. They went from they made the coaching change in the middle of 2008-9 from Tom Rennie to John Tortorella. And from that point through the 2017-18 season, so it's basically 9 years, they had two coaches. They had Tortorella and Vigneault. And they went to the conference finals 3 times. They had a lot of success. And then now they're kind of in this turnover where they went to David Quinn. And it was not surprising that they moved on reasonably quickly from Quinn because he was always perceived as a transition coach. Get us from here to there. And then the next guy is going to be the guy who can take us. And that almost worked out. It almost did. The plan almost worked. But now they're on their second coaching search in 3 summers. They're going to have their third coach now since 2021.
7 years.
It's like, 3 years, right? 4 years.
Yeah,
it'll be the third coach in 4 seasons when next season starts. So
right.
You don't want to get into that kind of a treadmill either, where you're just discarding coaches after every couple of seasons. And from Chris Drury's standpoint, or looking at it, this is a critical hire for him. How many coaches do you get to hire? Not that you don't get to hire coaches every 2 years unless you're Lou Lamoriello.
Right.
And he's not quite that yet. So no. So this is going to be a very challenging search.
I completely agree. I also think, to your point about kind of the narratives that the team was facing heading into both the years that they hired Quinn and Gallant, it was pretty clear what they needed at that moment in time. And, David Quinn was a lot more about ushering the next generation of talent, developing that talent. And Gallant was more so just getting them over that hump of qualifying for the playoffs. That was the expectation of Gallant coming in. Now, just as they go on, it's inching closer. It's so close to Stanley Cup or bust now going forward with this core and what they're locked into. And I think that this is also going to take the right guy coming in here and accepting this challenge head on, that this is the next step for this range. Like, that's a lot of pressure to be coming in and, it's Stanley Cup expectations immediately.
Right. And let's be fair here. It wasn't only the coach who was flawed here.
Of course not.
The roster construction was flawed, as we can see. And the player's performance, it still gets back to it still
falls on them.
Artemi Panarin did not score a goal. Mika Zibanejad scored 1 goal. Alexis Lafreniere did not have a point. Adam Fox, sort of wavered. There, other than Shesterkin and as we've said over and over, to an extent, Kreider, they just didn't get, and Tarasenko, who was on the years, they just didn't get anywhere near what they expected from their top players. They just didn't, and so that's on them too. Certainly, it's on them. They, Chris Drury on the weekend said in his exit meetings nobody wanted to be let off the hook. So hopefully there's a hopefully there's a response from these players who, next year, it's a difficult team. It's a difficult group. They have a lot of veterans locked into no moves. They have a lot of players who are pretty much set in their ways. They're
a lot of strong personalities.
And 8, 9, 10-year veterans in that room. So I think they're going to need someone who can command respect just by walking in the room, and that's not an easy thing to do. And again, we see the pool. I don't know. Does Peter Laviolette have that credibility? I think he does.
Mm-hmm.
He is a former Cup winner. It's a while ago, but he took two other teams to the finals. So I'm not endorsing Laviolette right now, but I think he is the kind of person who would walk in the room and get instant attention. Because again, you can't just keep turning over coaches.
So the next question is, where do they go from here? What sort of, you just touched on it a little bit, but what sort of coaches that they should be targeting? I look at this group and I look at where they've come, and I just can't imagine that they go back to a coach who is in his first year head coaching gig in the NHL. As great as Knobloch has been at the AHL level and how great he's been in his, couple of cameos with the Rangers when they needed him, I just think that it would be so counterproductive to go after an inexperienced, first time coach, college coach. Any sort of route like that just seems extremely counterproductive. Like you said, I think they need somebody that will command respect immediately and has a proven track record. And you need a proven track record in order to get that kind of respect in this room.
Right. I agree. And now, is there an assistant coach who is just can present such a powerful case?
Possibly.
Possibly. I don't think you should rule out Jay Leach,
Or Burnett.
And I also and Andrew Burnett, absolutely. But I also think that the next coach and Drury need to have some sort of a real personal relationship too. I think this is a guy who needs to be joined at the hip with the GM. The coaches need to be, I think, joined at the hip. And we haven't even talked about the roster construction. So I mean, there are all
one problem at a time, Larry. One problem at a time.
there are all these issues, going on. Right.
No, it's a lot. It's a lot. Like, for them to be coming off of this colossal letdown of a season and to be not only having questions about how the team is constructed, but now they need a new voice in the room, and now they need a new guy at the helm. It's a lofty turnaround this offseason in terms of where they want to be next season.
And where they kind of thought they were
right
a year ago and through the entire season. This is a team that waited for the playoffs all year, and they told you that.
Yeah,
we can't wait to get to the playoffs. We can't wait to get to the playoffs. They clinched in their reaction. What, there were 8 or 9 games left? I think 9.
Yeah.
And they, and it's basically like they said, well, we don't care about the rest of the games. We just want to get
coasted.
And like, well, I really hadn't seen very many teams like that.
Yeah.
And I've covered a lot of teams that clinched early. I covered a lot of teams that clinched late. But their entire purpose was to play in the playoffs, and they didn't show up. In at least 3 out of the last 5, and maybe even 4. So there's a lot there when you take a look at just where they were a year ago as to where they are now, just maybe in the perception of where they are. It's really kind of an interesting turnaround. And the cap situation is such a challenge that I look at it over and over and just don't know what Drury's how he's going to approach this. The other thing I think is interesting about the coaching search is a coach going to come in and attempt to have this personnel, and whatever it is, in September? There certainly are going to be changes. But is the coach intractable and say, no, I need these players to play my system. They have to play my way, or does he adapt? And I think that's always a question I've been interested in. Or does the coach adapt a little bit to
what they already have? Yeah.
And I know what he can do, and I'm going to have to challenge him to do more. But or Mika Zibanejad or Philip Hedl, not singling out Panarin, but it's kind of like, how do you get these guys to play at their peak, and how do you get this team to become a playoff, a playoff ready team, because they weren't this year, which I think is
Right.
the biggest, really the biggest disappointment. Again, we've said a lot, and I've said a lot. It's not that they lost; they lost to a
It's how
really
they lost.
it's how they lost. It
Of
was
course.
just so disappointing the way they went down. They just didn't seem to have, much backbone in the series. They just didn't. And, that was just a real letdown the way they played.
So here's my next question for you, and I can kind of preface it by giving, I guess, a little bit of insight into how I see it. Do you think this could have been a knee-jerk reaction, an overblown response to how this season ended? Part of me, I mean, knowing what we know, I think that once it becomes clear after exit interviews with players that, that a new voice was needed, then that's the direction you always have to go. But when you do look at his body of work, could they have looked at this season and this first round finish as a fluke and, not make any knee-jerk reactions, or do you think that this was the only option of how to move forward, knowing what we know?
That's a good question.
Thanks. I do this for a living.
You should be good reporter.
Yeah.
What I think is that, again, a lot of his history played into this, because I
Right.
think people, yes, I think they could have said, you know what, this was, as Gallant framed it, this was just a bad 2 weeks. It was a
Right.
bad 2 weeks for everybody.
Right.
Coach didn't,
Yeah, coach didn't
bad
do
work by the coach,
XYD.
bad
Yeah.
work by everybody except the goalie and the net
Yeah.
front presence.
Mhm.
That's it. They could have said, look, this was, we caught lightning in a bottle a little bit last year.
Mhm.
Now this year it's come back. It's
Mhm.
come back on us.
Should have been reversed.
If we had,
Should have been a first round exit last season and a conference
right,
final
right,
this season. If they had gone in the right order,
yeah.
would we
If
still be having this conversation right now?
Right. Well, if they had gotten knocked out in 5 last year by Pittsburgh, would he have made it to the second year? Because I
that would have
think
been shocking, though. Would
I
it
think
have? Wouldn't have?
because I think there's always there's this cloud.
Yeah.
It's like, well, he's not
Tim.
going to make it. So you
Yeah,
start,
it's him.
and I think they could have said, we're good. We're going to rebuild the team. I see that we needed a little more of this and we need a little more of that. What are you nuts? We're going to fire a coach who's
Yeah,
got
that's what I'm,
110.
that's
But
what
I
I'm
think at the
thinking.
start, but I think at the start of next year, there would have been, okay,
Right.
they get off to a not even a start like last year. It
I
wouldn't,
know.
because I don't think he would have been given until November. Let's say they
Right.
start the season, 3-5-1.
He would have been gone.
It would have been
Yeah.
constant talk. So
Mm-hmm. Right.
yes, I think in a slightly different circumstance, that's what they would have done too.
Right.
But I think also that it's become evident there were some philosophical issues that divided the coach and the GM. And again, I think that tension built during the series.
Yeah.
I think tension built within the organization. I think tension built in the relationship between the team and player. I think Gallant knew that he was coaching for his job. I do.
Yeah. Nobody's going to succeed under that circumstance.
And I think he became a little more stubborn. I wrote last week, he's a little bit stubborn. But almost every coach is stubborn,
Right.
because coaches know they're going to be fired.
Yeah.
And so they want to be fired doing it their way,
Right.
not somebody else's way.
Yeah.
So there are very few coaches I've known who are not very stubborn.
Right.
Because they believe in themselves. And again, that's why general managers generally don't instruct coaches on lineup,
what they do.
on way to use players, because then once a GM says, no, you have to use this guy. Now listen, there are exceptions if they're if a player is being showcased for a trade, or there's a major disconnect. But if the general manager tells the coach, well, you have to play this guy, and the team loses, then the coach turns around and says, "Well, it's not my fault. I didn't want."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, you know,
Yeah.
I think you need to let the coach coach.
Right.
And I think that, again, I just think the relationship probably had frayed a little bit. And this was just such a crushing, crushing disappointment. You know, I've been watching the Rangers for a long, long time. No,
Not saying exactly.
but this was really one of the most disappointing ends to a season I can recall. And so I don't think the Rangers could have stood pat going into next year.
I think you're totally right. And this had crossed my mind
What?
I think you're totally right. I'll
Uh,
say it again. Totally 100% right. And thinking in thinking about, a couple days ago or whatever it was when it was up in the air what was going to happen, the thought of them sticking with Gallant coming into next season, they get off to a tough start. Is a mid-season coaching change what anybody wants, and that was definitely a route that it was going to be headed toward if they did stick with Gallant. But I also wonder, just playing devil's advocate here, I just wonder what could have been, I guess, if the Rangers did stand their ground, did support Gallant from the beginning, right as the season ended. Of course, he's coming back, giving him that vote of confidence. Would that have been able to have dissipated the dark cloud over Gallant's head of this worry of going into year 3 and all of his coaching destinations? How tormenting that must be for anybody. I just wonder what could have happened, what could have been. But I definitely think that if the two options were to either do a mid-season coaching change, that just having that on the table at all was just something that the Rangers had to avoid altogether. So it probably was what needed to happen at the end of the day. But I guess we'll see.
No, you're right. You're right too. because once the Rangers failed to act that way,
yeah, that was it.
Right.
And why would he want to come back for an organization that didn't have his back? So I think when they said mutually agreed to part ways, I'm sure Gallant sat down and was like, I did not appreciate having to field questions about my job security in front of anybody and everybody.
Mm-hmm. And listen, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he's behind
100%
next year.
Absolutely. I think he should be. I think he should be.
Yeah. And there are coaches, and I know he wouldn't want to hear this, but there are coaches who are, who can jumpstart teams, who who serve a real purpose. He served a very constructive purpose here.
Yeah.
He got the Rangers to the conference finals and got them to 107 points. So
yeah, he didn't just get them over the hump, even though that was the goal at the beginning of it. But yeah, he did turn them into contenders. Helped.
Yeah. And listen, he has a very good case, walking into, say,
anywhere
or wherever. I mean, he had been in Columbus before, but regime far removed. I don't know, but he has a solid case to walk in. Look what I did with this.
Right.
They didn't really have we don't really have a checking line, or they didn't really have a checking line. We didn't, we went off for, we went all in on skill, and I was able to still get them. So
yeah.
I think he has a real good case. I don't think his reputation at all, was tarnished here.
No.
I mean, certainly shouldn't be. And what we see is that players relate to him personally. I mean, he is a very good, person as a coach. He is, as humane as a coach as I've been around. I mean, no one is more humane than Larry Robinson. So he is the gold standard for anyone in this league who has ever dealt with head coaches. I mean, there's nobody who's a better person than Larry Robinson, who's been in the league ever. Well, Adam Graves is right there, but he didn't coach. So, but the little things, and we actually, this came up in conversation last week when all the writers were spending the day in New Jersey. We were out for lunch at
Great
Hobby.
times. Hobbies. Big
Hobbies.
shout out to Hobbies. Everybody go to Hobbies in Newark.
Yeah, no, we were saying though, it came up that Gerard Gallant would, when Rangers would be on the road, if a player was traded from a team,
Yep.
he would start. If a player's family was there, he would
start.
He
Black History Month, every African American player in the lineup.
Ryan Reeves on the first line.
Yep. Keandre Miller, everybody
and
out
it
there.
was and Keandre, and was interesting about that because Reeves moved up to start that game.
Mm.
And I asked him after the game, I said, what was that about? And he sloughed it off as, nah, I just wanted to see something different. I wanted a bigger guy up with Mika at the start. And afterward, one of the players actually pulled me aside and said, you started him because.
Of course.
So, I mean, but he was always so considerate of players, and you take a look at other situations that go on around the league, even this year on Long Island, the decision not to allow Josh Bailey to play his 1,000th game at home, because they had scratched him, so he had to play it on the road, and that's just nothing you would ever have seen. And I do think
he could never do that. Would never do that.
He could never do that. I mean, he was very protective of his players. He believes in the old school mentality.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's very refreshing. So I'm sure he'll be back, whether it's next season, whether he wants to take some time off, whether he Anaheim is open.
I hope he goes to California. I hope he goes to some sunny California place like that. That would just, he deserves that.
I want you to each put your GM caps on a close here.
I don't know.
Give me your top two candidates, Molly. Who are your top two?
I can't. That's like the craziest thing. Like last season, it was so clear cut. He was one of the best available options, if not the best available option when they first hired Gallant. And that just, the pool that they have now, you're either recycling, look, Peter Laviolette, what is it? One playoff series win since 2018, I think it was. Yeah. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know who the right answer is right now. I really don't. And I feel like the options, it's, you're either taking a risk with this guy in one regard or taking a risk with another guy in this regard. There really is no clear cut, which is why, and I wrote this, why I genuinely thought that they would hold off, why they wouldn't make that leap. But I guess, like we said, it's a better option than doing something mid-season. But it's a very shallow pool, no clear-cut front runners. But it's also it's a huge decision for the organization at this moment in time. This guy is being charged with leading the team to the Stanley Cup. No ifs, ands, or buts. That's the expectation. And I really think it's going to take the right kind of person to take that on. Someone who is to embrace that. I think that also could be a bit of Gallant's issues, like you mentioned, Larry, with this apprehension coming up on his third season, just how his track record has been. There's got to be a loss of confidence there. Somebody's got to come in and absolutely embrace this giant spotlight and this microscope that they're under in this circumstance, because everything it's going to fall even more on the coach, going forward now that they're making this change at the helm. So I can't give you top two options. I really can't. Maybe as options become more clear cut from what we're hearing in a week or so, but at this moment in time, which I don't want anybody to worry hearing me say that, but like, I don't know. I really don't know.
Larry, do you have a top two?
I think you have to acknowledge that Laviolette is probably the safe choice.
Yeah.
But again, I think just about everybody would like to see the Rangers hire a fresh guy, come in with a little bit of a different dynamic, bring a little bit of a different dynamic. But as Mollie said, and I think everyone recognizes, it is a major risk because I think again, this how many more coaches does Chris Drury have to hire? And so I don't know that Chris Drury is saying I'll take this guy who's never coached before. I don't know. It's going to be fascinating. So, I don't know. I think you kind of put Laviolette aside. Um, I don't know that he would be an inspiring choice. I think he would certainly, I mean, he is a competent NHL coach. We know that. He's been doing it forever. Is that what the Rangers need? I'm not so sure. But again, I'm not conducting the interviews. I'm not in the interviews. I don't know, I don't know how these guys are presenting themselves. Again, the concept of bringing the AHL coach up, which, I raised the other day, the Rangers have not done that in 50 years. They haven't brought somebody up from their minor league team to coach the Rangers since 1973. Not likely they're going to do it. I think that Chris Knobloch deserves an interview. I would be very interested. He's had interviews before. Actually, I was told the other day that he had interviewed for the New Jersey job, the offseason where they hired Ruff. And I believe Knobloch was also interviewed in Buffalo before I think they hired Granato, or maybe it was the cycle before that. But so he has, he deserves, I think, an interview. He's done a terrific job getting the Wolfpack to their division finals now. They've won 2 series already. But again, it's a real risk. You're gonna hand over this team that, again, it's kind of cup or bust.
It is. And that's
right?
that's a phrase that we
like, I feel like it gets thrown around a lot more than it should. And the Rangers have definitely been in that conversation for a couple of seasons now. But now, I like it. It really is.
But it really is.
It really is now.
But you know what? It's cup or bust. But they're going to have to fight. They're going to have to fight to make the playoffs next year.
Doing it all over again.
So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see where Drury goes on this. I mean, from a writer's perspective, there'll be nobody more entertaining to cover than Patrick Waugh, but I don't think that's in the cards. I mean, I think it's fair to talk about Bob Hartley. He's been out of the league for a long time though now. Chris played for him. I know they have a good relationship. But I don't believe Bob even got an interview last time. I think they were very limited interviews the last time because they kind of zeroed in on Gallant. They talked to Rick Tocchet. They were waiting to see whether I remember it was a couple of years ago, so they were waiting also to see whether the Bruins would fire Cassidy, and they didn't. Whether Brind'Amour would leave Carolina. Brind'Amour would have been the first choice for any team in the league, regardless of whether they had a coaching vacancy or not. People would have fired their coaches if Rod Brind'Amour had said, what, I'm out of Carolina. So they were looking at that. They were looking, to see if Mike Sullivan was going to be available. But Gallant was always at the top, and they did very, very few interviews. So as far as I know. And so does it matter that Bob Hartley didn't get an interview 2 years ago? Will he get one now? I'm not sure, but he's certainly a name. But he's another guy who's been around. Clearly, he won a cup. He had pretty good success in Calgary for a short term. So these are veteran NHL coaches. I do think that a lot of people would like to see somebody else. I think people would like to see, a Jay Leach, a real risk. I mean, it's boom or bust. And it'll be Chris. It'll certainly be the owner um, approving the whatever decision, and that's not unusual. So yeah, we'll see.
Well, Larry will be all over the search for a coach, and we'll talk to you next time when they hire him, and we'll see you at Citi Field, the ballpark, as the offseason approaches at a Mets game. And thanks for coming on.
Fun times.
Just when Larry and you thought you'd have some time off, the Rangers make your life miserable. No, it's fine. It's just another extra couple of weeks as you wait, Molly, as that wraps up episode 125 Up in the Blue Seats, a Ranger podcast from the New York Post. Thanks to Andrew Hartz for helping me produce the show. And you catch up on all old episodes on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts. And on the New York Post Sports YouTube page, just find that Up in the Blue Seats playlist. Give us a thumbs up. Comment below. Who do you want to be the new Rangers head coach? Molly, where were you when you found out the news? Were you out with the gals in the city? Like, what were you doing?
I don't need to be giving anybody this visual, but I just got out of the shower, honestly, when it happened, which honestly, I feel like that stuff always happens to me, whether it's a trade. When Filipino signed his contract extension, I was on my way to a dinner reservation in the city, and then I had to sit at the table and write a story on my phone, which is never a fun time. But yeah, like we get into in a little bit, like we just got into, I was a little shocked. I wasn't sure that they were actually going to pull trigger on this, but here we are.
And on a Saturday, I was at the Mets game, and then 2 innings later, my mom ended up with food poisoning and was throwing up in the bathroom at Citi Field. So the Rangers were throwing up, the Mets were throwing up, my mom was throwing up. Everyone was throwing up in New York. Good God. Can somebody just win? It was so good. It was all good just a week ago, one philosopher used to say. But now a week later, it has all hit the crapper. Well, Molly, we will be back next when the Rangers hire a new head coach. But until then, enjoy the offseason. We'll talk to you soon. And thanks, everybody, for listening to Up in the Blue Seats.